Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1169th New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Ayesha Williams and Salome Asega. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Ayesha Williams is the executive director of the Laundromat Project. She's an arts professional with 2 decades of experience working with visual artists, presenting programs, and generating funding for commercial galleries and nonprofit institutions. Prior to the LP, she managed visual arts at Lincoln Center and served as the director of Kent Gallery, New York. In addition, Ayesha is on the board of Rivers Institute for Contemporary Art and Thought in the Black School and a member of Independent Curators International Independence. And our host today, Salome Asega, is an artist and director of New Ink, a cultural incubator program for art, design, and technology launched by the New Museum. Salome is an inaugural cohort member of the Dorchester Industries Experimental Design Lab, developed by the Esther Gates, Rebuild Foundation, and Prada. She is also a co-founder of Power Plant, a Brooklyn digital arts lab for teens incubated at New Ink. Salome has participated in residencies and fellowships with I-Beam, the Laundromat Project, and Recess. She has exhibited internationally and sits on the boards of the School for Poetic Computation, Jerome Foundation, and National Performance Network. And with that, I will hand it off to Salome to get us started.
Thank you so much, Magley and Chloe and the full Brooklyn Rail team for having us. I'm so honored to have this conversation with the powerhouse who is Ayesha Williams. I learned so much from you in the Laundromat Project about what it means to be a responsible, loving, caring, accountable community and civic actor. There's no fluff here. I'm going to say that again. There's no fluff. Your work is grounded, and the LP teaches us that stewarding community and being an active neighbor can be practiced and rehearsed every day in small and big ways. So I have now what feels like a long history with the Laundromat Project. I've had so many friends do the fellowship and residency program, and I'd go to their like culminating events. And I remember around 2015, 2016, I worked up the courage to apply myself. And I remember, like, fully remember sitting on a train and writing and rewriting my application, like being in the corner of my apartment, filming and refilming my artist statement for the application. And then I got in, and it was completely a transformative residency experience. Um, and I've continued my relationship with the LP as a Catalyst circle member, and also I'm very lucky to be part of the same block association as the Laundromat Project. So I'm a neighbor and see you all every day on my commute to the train. Um, but I'll just jump in with some questions. I have so many questions for you, and I know we'll probably get into some tangents too. Um, so now, Aisha, you're a little over 2 years into your role as director, but have been with the organization since I was a residency resident in 2016. So much has shifted, evolved, and maybe even devolved in the world in these last years. And I'm curious for you and your team in this moment, how do you understand the role and the responsibility of the Laundromat Project?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And by way of just like entering into this space as well, a deep thank you, Salome, for hosting and holding space for this conversation and dialogue. Very excited to be in conversation with you of all people. And Magley and Chloe and the Brooklyn Rail team, deep gratitude for the invitation to get to share about our work and our practice at the LP, and all the folks who joined. It'll be a fun conversation, so looking forward to sharing more with all of you too. And so yeah, so I am in my ninth year next month here at the LP, which is like when I say ninth year, I'm like, wow, 9 years has been a while. It's half the time of the organization itself. We celebrate our 20-year anniversary this year. And like you mentioned, Salome, I came in with you. So I feel like we like grew into this organization together. 2016 was my first year. And coming to the LP from Lincoln Center was just a very different orientation to the arts ecosystem and kind of understanding myself and my place within the ecosystem itself. And a lot has changed, not just in the time that I've been with the LP, like you mentioned, but just in the history and the course of the life of the organization itself. We were founded in 2005 by Risa Wilson. The idea of the organization seeded kind of in her memory and in her spirit and in her body in 1999, formally incorporated in 2005. During that time, we had a financial crisis in 2008, which shifted a bit of how the organization saw itself and thinking about its business model for itself, which I can go much more deeply into. We've had the first round of President Trump in 2016, which deeply shifted how we understand our work and how we orient our work at the LP. And now we're in this moment of transition within the world and continuing to rethink how we continue to evolve organizationally. So a lot has changed, but we've moved through all of those changes. We are an extremely responsive organization. We're nimble, both given, just the size of the organization and the work that we do. It's constantly responsive to community. We do a lot of listening. We do a lot of reflection, and we try to represent what our communities are stating our needs or what they're asking for in terms of needs. And that helps us understand both how we engage, how we build and grow our work, how we consider risks within our work, what we choose to take on, what we acknowledge that we can take on, and what we acknowledge that we can't absorb, all as the world is constantly moving around us, constantly holding on to, Agent Marie Brown and moving at the speed of trust, thinking about moving with the rhythms of community. Those are kind of core tenets of the organization and what we bring into the work every day and what we do. And so all of that has brought us here to today. What's the date? The 20th, 22nd of February, 2025. So I think that just in little parts, and I can go more deeply into different parts, but just kind of like to set it, I'll open with that.
Yeah, as an alumni and as a follower of your work, it's very clear that the LP isn't afraid to take risks or iterate on its model. It's definitely grown with the times, right? And it, as you said, is very responsive. I'm curious to hear from you. Do you think of the Laundromat project as risk taking, and what does it even mean to be risk taking in a moment like this?
Yeah. That's a good question. And when I saw the question, I was thinking about that a lot. And it's something I just got back. I was away for a lot of January. I'm in a fellowship program for Black leaders across the country. So folks regionally, we're in the year-long fellowship program, just talking about leadership and leadership models and practices and things of that nature. But we spent January in Montgomery, Alabama, was transformative for me. It did a lot in terms of me understanding my role in the organization and in the world in these times. We heard from a lot of leaders who our direct organizers were very involved in the civil rights movement, knew Martin Luther King and John Lewis and all those folks. And they spoke a lot over the week about risk and what risk means at any moment in time, but particularly in times like these, when communities that we love, that we hold dear, are being threatened, are experiencing strife and all the things. What does it mean to absorb risks, to take risks, who can take risks, who can be protected, who can take on more risks in order to allow for folks to be able to live more deeply into their truths. And so when I think about risk in the context of the LP, I don't know if I think about it as risk. I just think about it as doing what we do. There's nothing else that we could do except what we do, which is honor our community, be responsive to our community, and do what we can do so that folks feel like themselves, they feel whole, they're able to show up as their whole selves. That might seem like a risk in other spaces, but at the LP, I think we're just scratching the surface. There, it's just the core, it's the base, it's who we are, it's what we do, it's fundamental to us and our work. So I don't know if I think about it as risky. I know other organizations that I do think I look at it and I'm like, y'all are taking on a lot of risks, and I'm grateful for you for doing that. But for us, I look at it as we are just doing the things that we were built to do. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that answer. I think that it's funny to think that creating a space for someone to feel safe and a place where they can like take the robes off as risky.
Yeah.
Because it can feel like being vulnerable is risky, but yeah, the LP does it so kind of naturally and authentically. Like it is a place where I feel like I can bring my full self. Um and okay, so you mentioned earlier that this is a major milestone year for the LP, 20 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years. I want to know, how are you marking the moment? What do you have in store for us this year?
Yeah, it's like one of those, um it's so funny. I know we're gonna go off on tangents and all the things. I'm a Beyonce person. I bought Beyonce tickets. I got Beyonce tickets. I'm going to Houston to see Beyonce. And every time like something happens in the day, I'm like, you know what? That was hard, but in June I'm going to see Beyonce. Like it's just something that I get to look forward to. So that's the way that we've kind of been orienting the anniversary. It is a hard, dark period moment of time, but we've done incredible work that deserves to be acknowledged and celebrated. We've collaborated with so many incredible people who we want to give flowers and give platform and share all that they've contributed to what we've been able to steward over all of these years. So 20th anniversary definitely is my highlight for the year. It's something I'm very much looking forward to. More to come, formal like release and share outs about the details and specifics of the program over the next couple of months. But we're doing like a small music series in the storefront space, highlighting the physical storefront space that we have on Fulton Street. Think NPR, Tiny Desk at lunchtime in the LP storefront. So that'll be fun. We have a podcast series that we'll be releasing closer to the end of the year. Last year, we worked with an ethnographer and collected a number of community stories about how arts and culture can help drive power in neighborhoods and in communities. And so there'll be a podcast series that captures those reflections from those conversations. So that'll be rolling out. We will have a proper birthday party with birthday hats and all the things, which is really exciting. Something that I feel like very passionately about. We are the Laundromat Project. We've never owned or operated a laundromat. I actually just got an email to attend a laundromat convention, which is like, okay, it's always all the time we get laundromat catalogs. We've never owned and operated a laundromat before, but it's a space that we, from the beginning, in the founding of the organization, understood the value of activating a third space before we were talking about third spaces in the ways that we're talking about them now. We were thinking about that in laundromats. So we did program in laundromats for a number of years. Our last official laundromat project was in 2014, I believe. My year might be a little off. But we actually want to acknowledge our history in those spaces and the ways that we activated third spaces in that way. So there'll be a small series where we kind of highlight some of the projects that occurred in laundromats and talk about the value and importance of having spaces for a community to come together in a very natural way. So yeah, there'll be some special swag and things, but I'm very excited about the programs themselves. It'll give us a chance and an opportunity to highlight the artists who we've worked with, the artists both in our neighborhood of Bed-Stuy and around New York City. Going to activate our public space for community and just celebrate and tell the story of what we've done over the past 20 years.
Mm. I'd love if you can also maybe share with us like what qualifies as a third space. Because yeah, that terminology has
Yeah,
evolved too since its
yeah, yeah.
founding.
And I think it's evolving still. I think
Yeah.
there's another term that I just heard the other day, which I wasn't familiar with. The way I understand third spaces is that they're spaces outside of work and home where community can naturally come together with one another. So whether it be laundromats, community spaces, community gardens, things of that nature, would be considered third space. So outside of, I guess your regularly activated space. And so, yes, but we've been doing third spaces since the beginning of our origin story. The laundromat being that third space, and activating and still continuing to activate public spaces in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been reading that since the pandemic and since hybrid work and remote work has become more of a standard that there's been a rise in desire for third spaces or experiences that bring us to third spaces. So yeah, the LP has been there.
We've been there doing it since 1999. So.
So how many alumni does LP have at this point? And I'd love to hear, we don't have favorites, but um, what are some of the most memorable projects that you've supported?
Yeah. So at this point, on our last count, and we have about 320 or so artists that we've supported over the past 20 years of the organization. That includes both artists who've come through our Create Change residency program, which is our project specific program, our fellowship program, which is our artist development kind of training, place-based training practice program. And then in 2022, we introduced a new program, specifically in Bed-Stuy, our anchor home, where it's a microgrant program called Create and Connect, where we support local artists and collectives doing projects specifically in Bed-Stuy. So across those three programs, we've worked with over 320 artists formally. And there are folks who've come through in many other ways and avenues. But over that time, like deep engagement with about 320 folks. So it's a lot of folks and a lot of projects to like pull from, and think about and consider favorites. I think maybe I won't say favorites, but I'll say ones that stand out to me in this moment. I'll do that. Some in particular, or the one that's like hitting me right now, is a project that we supported in 2020. The artists were Jacqueline Reyes and Xenia Diente. And their project originally, going into 2020, and also to give you a little bit of background, we select the artist the year before the program year. So we would have selected this artist cohort in 2019. And then they're actively engaging in their projects in 2020, and we all know what 2020 was. And so the project itself was supposed to be an arts festival in Jackson Heights, Queens, particularly focused on the Filipino immigrant community, Filipino American community, kind of highlighting all the artistry and the cultural artistry within those communities. And 2020, COVID hits, and so we needed to do a lot of shifts in real time with the projects. And we are a community-based organization. Our work is in community. Our work is directly engaging with community members, with individuals, with people, bringing folks together is what our work is about. And we couldn't come together at that moment in time. But I think their project speaks to the responsiveness of the organization itself. They shifted very, very quickly to be a direct like service project where they partnered with a local restaurant near where they were going to actually host the festival, and they created meals for nurses at the hospital. And so that's how their project actually evolved and shifted in that moment in time. And to me, it stands out because it just speaks to the nature of the work, always responsive, always reflective, doing what's needed to be done in community. Our work is always anchored in arts and culture, and always understanding that arts and creativity and culture are the catalyst for bringing folks together. But it's still, at the end of the day, is always about community, and how we're shaping, shifting, supporting community through our creativity and our creative practices. And so that one definitely will always kind of forever stick out for me, just in how they were able to flex so quickly, how we were able to support that flex so quickly. So that one only because it's one of the ones that we were kind of collaborating for a while. Lisanya Cruz's We the News, where Lisanya Cruz, artist, designer, Dominican immigrant here in the States. Worked in Bed-Stuy, and essentially what she wanted to do was humanize the stories of immigrants and first generation Black immigrants here to the States. And so over the course of 2 years, we worked with Lasagna in that project, collected narratives and stories of folks and turned those narratives and stories into these really beautiful zines, which she then took around the neighborhood, and it expanded into, around the state and around the country and internationally as well. She created a newsstand that was mobile and brought the newsstand around, and it featured these very beautiful zines and these stories as a way of at the LP, one of our values is write our own histories. So as a way of both writing and telling your own history, not having the news or politicians or whoever it might be dictate who you are, and telling you, that you are not human, essentially. Actually self-determining what your narrative is and what your story is, and sharing that out with folks, proliferating that narrative out to folks, which is really critical and really important. And so that one sticks out to me too, just by the nature and the reach and the expansiveness of the project itself, and the nature and the context of what was being shared. Maybe I'll just do those two. I can think of some others, but I don't know for time if you want to go more.
No, I love the projects you highlighted. One, because it shows that, as a container, how the LP works with residents to pivot in, moments of, crisis or change in the world, and again can be responsive. So I love that. And then I'm just like a big fan of Lasagna's project.
Okay.
And and it's such a good example of how the LP can like seed an idea. And we've seen that work travel, as you said, everywhere, So yeah, it's the LP is also, it's, kind of an incubator. And then as you were speaking it, I was just thinking about some other folks who have come through the program who have all landed in pretty impressive positions. I'm thinking about people like Rasu Jalani, who's now, leading the Brooklyn Arts Council. And I think, did Nonsi Matiti also come through? Or
Nancy was a fellow in, I think, 2012, 2013, but Nancy is definitely, and Nancy has many, many like webs, the LP. Nancy created the LP's prior brand. Our classic tote is Nancy. Like, yes, lots of, yeah.
yeah, and is now, running the graphic design department at Yale. And I just think about the intentional curriculum that both the fellows and the residents have, and then how these people moved through the program and carry this
Mhm.
learning with them into their roles. Like I know I do in my role at New Ink. And yeah, I'm just curious, are there other people that I'm missing that have like moved through the program and are elsewhere now?
Yeah, the Black School, Shawnee and Joseph, Shawnee Peters and Joseph Collet, both at some point in the iteration of the Black School were with the LP. There are a number of folks, LP alum, who found themselves in really incredible spaces in the world, and thinking about that as a ripple or an extension of a network. Is something that we think about a lot, and something that I'm personally just fascinated by and find it to be an extreme value to the ecosystem overall. I had a conversation with Risa, and there's always this question about what does like scale look like for LP? Like, are there LPs in other cities? Is that ever a consideration? And I can say for myself it's not a consideration. I believe I will speak for Kemi, my predecessor, that that was never something that was, on offer or something that we were actively thinking about or looking to pursue. But what I had shared with Risa, the way that I think about it is there's not a need for other LPs because to your point, LP's pedagogy and curricula is in folks who are creating and seeding their own things in other places. So just by the very nature of how we engage with artists, we are our values, and I'm not saying our values in like a proprietary way in any way at all. But I think the way that we orient our work and the way that we see the world is just embedded in other folks. And so it's what you take with it and what you create from that. To me, that's the extension of the LP's work and the LP's practice. And it's all specific to, your own individual need, your community's needs. Uh, there's we're more interested in going deeper as opposed to going wider out. Like, how can you impact and how can you engage more intentionally? What are the ways to do that? You can be more intentional with your community than we as an organization could ever be. But we are in alignment because we have been in collaboration and in community with one another. And so to me, that's how I see the extension of our work and what we do.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I know the LP used to have three neighborhood anchors, right? And it was the Bronx, it was Harlem, and it was Bed-Stuy.
Yeah. Yep.
And now the programming and initiatives feel rescoped to focus on Bed-Stuy. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about the process to do this and then what acting hyperlocally has opened up for the artists you work with or you as a team.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'll even go a step back. Before we were at three neighborhoods, we were everywhere. I think there's like an LP project in Philly. Risa's from Philly, although spent her formative years here in Bed-Stuy. But there were projects in Philly. I think there was a project in Newark. There's like everywhere. Yonkers, lots of other places. When Kemi Alasami came on as ED, as a part of that kind of strategic visioning there, the goal was to kind of pare down a bit. We're always trying to go deeper, make deeper connections with community. That's always been kind of the nature of the organization. And with that, honed in and focused in on what you mentioned, those three anchor neighborhoods. Bed-Stuy, we were founded in Bed-Stuy, had always been active in Bed-Stuy as one of our homes. Deep connections to Harlem as well. Our first programs director, Patrushka Bazin-Larson, is based in Harlem, lots of connections and relationships in Harlem. And in the South Bronx, just based off of community connections and organizations, artist connections, and things of that nature. So we were in those three neighborhoods and kind of practicing and working within those neighborhoods. In the South Bronx, we had a apartment space on Kelly Street. And we were in partnership with a number of other kind of organizations and entities, community-based organizations and entities in that neighborhood too. So kind of loosely called the Kelly Street Collaborative, where we programmed and worked with community during our time there since 2014, 2019, so about 5 years or so. But even while we were in Kelly Street in that program space, our admin offices were in Harlem. We were still doing work in Bed-Stuy and in Harlem and in the South Bronx. So that time at Kelly Street was really formative because it helped us understand we were doing a lot of work programmatically and pedagogically, working with artists to understand what it means to work and be in community with your community, how to build community within your community, how to be responsive to issues of concern that are coming up in your community, using your creative practices to do that, and asking ourselves, what does that mean and what does that look like for us to do that work organizationally? If we're teaching people how to do it, what does that mean for us to actually live and do it ourselves? And so it took a lot of time to reflect on what it meant to be like embedded in a community, embedded in a neighborhood. And because of our long roots in Bed-Stuy and our history in Bed-Stuy, really, made the decision, let's go back home to Bed-Stuy and really like lay roots there. And both reconnect and go deeper with our relationships in the neighborhood. And so that's the storefront, 1476 Fulton Street. It's our primary space of programming. Our admin office is there, our program space. I'm talking about it like it's two different spaces. Our admin and program space is all in the storefront space. We're all under one roof, which is a lot for us because we were scattered before then. So it meant a lot. It was incredible to move into the storefront. But we do still do work citywide. That still is important for us. We're a New York City organization based and anchored in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. But being in Bed-Stuy has opened up so much about our work in our understanding of what it means to help support like an infrastructure of a space, what it means to build community with other folks being in community. So I think it's expanded our understanding of what are the possibilities of what an arts and culture organization can do. I think a lot of times I get questions. It's like, oh, you're thinking about a partnership with the local hospital, but you're an arts organization. So what does that mean? But what does it look like for a hospital to think about health equity using artists to consider possibilities of engaging with hospital patients to actually unearth and kind of uplift challenges and solutions to, greater equity within the healthcare system. How do you leverage creativity to actually solve for a lot of the social issues that we see in our communities that sometimes, the city doesn't solve for, and the city's not showing up. So somebody has to show up. So what is it like for us as an arts organization to show up and support that work? And so being kind of really rooted in the neighborhood now allows us to do that in a deeper and an even more intentional way. We're able to build relationships with community organizations, be in dialogue to think about what does it look like to support a community where folks feel like they can live, breathe, thrive, love, grow in. And what is it like for an arts organization to be contributing to that work? I think it's a really fascinating thing for me. It's something I'm passionate about and makes me excited. It's like a model for how we actually should be and live in the world. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think as we were saying before, the pedagogy for the fellows and the residents is so strong. And I remember even for myself, like, which had shifted my perspective from being witness to active participant. I feel like I was moving from seeing to acting, right? Like I was understanding that I had a stake in how my neighborhood changes, And and I'm wondering, as you're starting to build some of these relationships across sector at a local level, how are you thinking about, pedagogy or training for the non, I'm putting this in quotes, like the non-arts person, like for the hospital to like, how do you get the hospital to understand how to work with cultural practitioners or artists in a way that doesn't just instrumentalize art,
Yeah. Yeah. All credit to the programs team. Incredible. All credit to the LP team, present, past, and future, who make all of this happen, all of this work. I think that, well, I can use an example for this year for the fellowship program. The fellowship program essentially is it's an artist development to training program. So folks apply and we invite in. This year we have 12 artists who want to learn and understand just the basic kind of tools and frameworks for doing community-based work, using and how they might integrate that into their creative practices or their practice more broadly, whether it's creative specifically or larger aims and goals there. But with the fellows, what we are doing this year, what the programs team are doing this year, are actually partnering them with community-based organizations so that it's an opportunity for both the artists to understand in a practiced way how they can take what they're learning from the program and integrating that into kind of civic and social institutions and organizations and entities. But for the partner organizations, it's also an opportunity for them to be able to see in real time what the possibilities are of engaging folks that they might not necessarily consider going to as folks who can help kind of help them consider projects and programs that they're working on. And so it's a model that we'll continue to iterate on, and hopefully it's a model that can serve as a model for other entities and organizations. Um, uh, it gives us an opportunity to be able to share back our learning so that folks can really understand the value of integrating some kind of creative frameworks into their practices, whether it be an arts practice, a civic practice, a social practice, whatever that might be. So we're kind of diving more deeply into that work in real time now. I would say we've been inching towards that more intentionally over the years. And there's always been some type of like connection to a community-based organization, but at this point now where we've evolved to, it's framed around like a social issue within a community, an organization that's focused on a social issue within a community, and how we're bringing in artist practitioners to help be in dialogue to address something specific within that institution or within in that organization, and looking forward to sharing that out so that folks can see it as a viable model for how we can evolve our way of thinking in our practice.
Mm-hmm. And just so folks know, what are some of the kinds of issues that you've been tackling with the partner orgs?
Yeah, so this year in particular, we're focused on, and I'm committing this to memory, it's brand new, so we're just now diving in, we just started, but we're looking at climate justice, particularly climate justice in Black communities and communities of color. We are looking at gentrification and anti-gentrification strategies. We are thinking about Black and Indigenous solidarity practices. And we are doing some work and looking around reparations as well. So those are some of the issue areas that the fellows will be focused on and the partner organizations that we're bringing in to help support that work.
Nice. I'm excited to learn more about it as it unfolds this year.
Yes. And health equity. I forgot. I use health equity as the example, but health equity being another one of those this year too.
Right. So one of my favorite things about living close to the LP is turning onto Fulton Street on this like during the summer and seeing a very active sidewalk with people spilling out of the storefront and engaging with the residents or the fellows. And I'm would love to hear a little bit more about how the neighborhood has responded to the LP's presence on Fulton Street. There's also a beautiful mural on the outside. Maybe you can describe what it looks like and, feels like to step into the space.
Yeah. I love being on Fulton Street. It's a different experience every day. Folks, it's taken a little while. There's something about that door. I have to figure out, maybe putting like a bold sign on the door, like pull the door open. I think just by nature, folks, and I will say, during COVID, the door was closed for a little bit of time as we were like building out the space and all the things. And so I don't know if we did any kind of like broadcast about, the door is open, come in anytime, but folks find their way in. And finding their way in more so now than before. But yeah, the door is open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, we're closed. But folks come in, they ask questions. We have a library that we're building. They'll stay and look at books, and we'll be in dialogue about kind of anything and everything, non-art related. A lot of times folks will be like, it's not a laundromat. I just wanted to know what this thing was because I saw it from the street and I had to like come in and see. And it's just really a beautiful space to be in, to be able to have that as a part of our everyday, that it's unpredictable every day, but we learn so much every day and meet so many different people as they come into the storefront space. I think what I know about community work in practice is that it's a constant, ever evolving practice. Like you never just arrive, you're constantly pouring into it. And I think that's what we're doing organizationally is continuing to uplift that the space itself, 1476 Fulton, isn't the Laundromat Project space. It's called the Laundromat Project, but it's the community space. And so there are, a lot of visions for how we grow in the space, how community sees that as a space for them, and curated by them, being a responsive organization. The programming that happens in the space is in direct response to what we've heard from community about what they want to see happening in the space. So yeah, it's a community space. It's a space for folks. At some point, if we grow, it'll be a space where folks can practice things, but for right now, the limited space that it is, it's a space for folks to come together, to be in community with one another. It is a third space in a way. I've never thought about the storefront as a third space, but in a way, it is a third space. Funny that I never thought about it that way until just now. But yeah, it's filled with a lot of love. I think you feel the energy of all the folks who've come through, every single moment that you're in the space. It's just very, very evident that a lot of love was poured into that. A lot of energy is left in the space. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question directly, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
And
fully.
I'm actually I'm sorry, I cut you.
No, no, no.
I'm looking at the photo that's popping up right now on the screen, and the photos are just like photos of our activations. But that's my grandparents and my aunt in the photo, which I threw in there too, because it truly is. It's a community space. It's a family space. I think my whole family's been in this space. Our families have been in this space. So yeah, it's a home.
Yeah, you can feel it. I mean, every design decision of the storefront is also so considered. I mean, yeah, the furniture that was commissioned, the mural again on the outside, just yeah, how staff even sit inside. It's all so intentional. So I hope, yeah, if you live in the neighborhood, if you're on this call and live in Bed-Stuy, please pop in. And if you don't, it's worth the commute, the train ride. Come visit.
Yes, yes, yes.
Um, had a um, seeding or incubating strong leaders out in the field, but it has also done so internally. And I think about how the LP has really modeled Black women leadership for me, and thinking again about Risa, Patricia, Kemi, and now you. And I'm wondering what aspects of the organizational structure do you think support and make space for this kind of leadership development?
Mm. I love that question. And all love to Risa, Kemi, and Petrushka. I wouldn't be who I am as a professional, and I think as a person, without Kemi's mentorship and guidance, without Petrushka's support, without Risa's guidance and support as well. So deep love for each of those folks. And I, kind of coming under Kemi, truly valued and learned from her about her persistence and insistence on the importance of developing professionally, of pouring into the growth of folks as professionals, whether, it's during their time at LP or beyond LP. Like, what are you pouring into folks so that they feel they have or understand agency and power, and know that they have agency and power to shape and influence the spaces that they're in. And there is a lot of intentionality around that, whether it be through resources that are poured into that, coaching, so bringing in folks to coach individually, trainings that we have. We're going through a year-long embodied leadership training with the team. So the team probably is like, Ayesha, not another thing, but it's like, all pouring in all different tools that we can take with us. And carry on in whatever iterations we might find ourselves in professionally. But I think for me, I'm really interested in kind of reshaping how we understand work and our orientation to being in a workspace, and just coming out of spaces, trying to build a space that that the intention is to be a bit more human. It's a work in progress, always, 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 and by no means perfect in any way whatsoever, but the intention is always for that. And so I learned that from Kemi, who really, I think for me, set the model for me of what that could look like, and what that could be. The practices that, she championed. We have a sabbatical policy. So before I started my role as ED, I was on a 6 week. I wish it was 6 months. 6 weeks was still good. The 6 months would have been like, oh my goodness, the 6 weeks was still great. But I was on a 6 week sabbatical before I started my role. And that's, there aren't many, small nonprofit organizations at the time when we instituted the sabbatical policy that had sabbatical policies, but it's something that, Kemi uplifted as a value and something that was really important. And so it's a practice that we try to continue now, to this day. So for those folks, for me personally, they've modeled for me what it looks like to be a leader, to be a Black woman leader, as well. There are more now. So, deeply grateful to be in community with you, Salome, and other folks that we know. But there weren't many models when I was kind of elevating through my professional career, of Black women who I saw in leadership positions, who were doing really transformative and radical things. And so they've definitely been my guide, my North Star for what this can look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, I think, easier for arts organizations to model and act on their values programmatically. It is more difficult for them to operationalize those values, and it's very clear that the LP is testing and iterating that all the time, and I think that's what enables all kinds of leadership to develop through the program. Um, so I know building economic power for artists and also for community organizations is important to you, and I've seen this reflected in your kind of letters as being key to your tenure as director. And you mentioned Risha had originally envisioned the LP as a social enterprise,
Mhm.
and I'd love if you could walk us through what that original vision was. What was the model? And how are you thinking about alternative revenue models now, and how are you building power organizationally?
Yeah. So the original model for the organization was that we were going to own and operate a laundromat. The laundromat itself was going to fund the arts organization. And so that was the original idea, that never came into fruition, but it was all kind of based and modeled on a social enterprise based and modeled on self-determination. So if you can fund, you can do whatever, you want to do. You don't have to rely on other sources of income. It's all self-sustaining. And so that was the original idea for the organization. And I think, over the years, as we've grown and where we see ourselves now, I find myself kind of calling on those original ideas of like self-sustainability and self-determination. We were privileged to have received a gift from Mackenzie Scott in 2021, a pretty transformative, no strings attached grant, which has given us the opportunity to really think transformatively about what self-sustainability looks like for us as an organization, and also what community sustainability, and that's both our hyperlocal community in Bed-Stuy as well as our arts community, what it looks like for us as an organization to be able to resource and provide some kind of like foundation and infrastructure support, for those two communities as well. So where we find ourselves now is doing a lot of thinking about organizational models and structures, programmatic offerings that we can introduce that helps with that kind of generational wealth building, sustainability, kind of supporting infrastructure building, for those communities. Some of the things that we've been kind of rolling out and teasing out last year, we launched what I think is pretty incredible. It's a loan program. It's a zero interest loan program. It allows us to be able to leverage some small part of our assets to be able to support our artist community. It's only open to folks who come through our program, so those 320 artist alum that we have. But if folks are going through, having trouble paying rent or needing some additional resources to pay for their utility bill, or just launched a new project and one of their funders wasn't able to fulfill, a grant opportunity, but now they have to pay a collaborator, they can come to us. It's designed so that they can come to us for some bridge support while they get themselves settled, and we can help them kind of move through that period. And so we are looking at what it looks like to sustain that program itself, to think about continued funding for that program to continue to support those communities. We're thinking about collaborative models, collaborative partnerships, so that we are part of a group of folks who are helping with, infrastructure building and support and resources. How can we pull all of our resources together to be able to support these communities that we're a part of? So a lot of thinking about, asset development, which are things that's like, oh, we're all learning this. We don't talk about this in arts organizations, but we are talking about this because self-sustainability is power. It gives us power to do the things that we know will help grow and move our communities forward. So that's a lot of what we're thinking about and experimenting with in this moment.
Yeah, it's so exciting because it's not just about sustaining the organization, but it is about continued support for the artists that have come through the program. I think the loan program it is so genius. Can you say a little more about how the artists have responded to it? And also, is there like a cap for the loan size?
There is a cap, yeah. And I want to give credit to a lot of the folks who we've kind of learned from and modeled from Indie Space, that's based here, the Ujima Project that's up in Boston, and a number of other organizations are also doing similar things. So really inspired by their models, and thinking about how we brought that into the LP. There is a cap. It's a small loan at this point, but what does it like to grow, to support organizations? We're talking about ripples here. So what does that look like? So the cap is $2,000 for the loan program. And I will say that we've exhausted the initial kind of principal investment in the program. So looking at ways to extend that. And that was in the first 3 months of launching the program. So I would say that folks, there is a need. We know that there is a need because we have gone through all the funds for that program. And so thinking about ways that we might be able to expand it so that we can support even more artists through that initiative.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask one last question because I know there are some questions from the attendees. My last question is a little feelings oriented, a little mush.
Yeah.
So love can be a scary word to bring into professional contexts. We're taught to believe that work is sterilized of such strong feelings and that love is maybe too personal or too complicated or too messy to bring into some of these settings. And I think what I learned from the LP is that being propelled by love is actually mission critical. And can you speak to why love is one of the values of the organization?
Yeah, and I love the story about that propelled by love value too. I think we're on our third, not I think, I know, we're on our third strategic kind of vision period at the organization. We've been through 3 different iterations. And when Kemi came on as ED, they were preparing the last pieces of the plan and the vision and introducing, a value set. And one of our board members at the time, who also is an alum, Stephanie Dinkins, was like, oh, we need to talk about love and our values, because that is the foundation of what we do. It's why we show up for what we do, is how we act and are in community with one another from a space of love. And so in all the iterations of our values, which haven't changed much, they're all kind of still anchored in the same sentiments, but propelled by love is the only value that's been intact over 3 different kind of revisions of our mission, our vision, our practice. So it is critical, it is essential, it is everything for us. Love is embedded in all that we do, and is the cornerstone of everything that we do. We're propelled by love. I found this quote from Bell Hooks, and she says, "It's love. It's about what we do, not just what we feel. It's a verb, not a noun." And I just love that. I love that. Love that. I'm talking about love. I love that. If, you know, we do community work, we're in community with folks. If you're not led by love, then everything just disintegrates from there. And so, yeah, yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems so like I know it's so strange too because it's like, oh, you're not supposed to love, like you're not supposed to talk love in the workplace, but it's not romantic love. It's not, to your point, it's not, it is mushy, not mushy in a bad way. I cry at work. I mean, there have been so many moments and times when it's like just overwhelmed by an experience, an encounter, an engagement, a conversation. And that feeling or expression of that love is just so overwhelming sometimes, where it's like I've deeply connected with you and we are in community and in partnership with one another. I love you because I trust you to move with me in realizing kind of this vision of a better world for all of us where we can be our full selves. And if love isn't a part of that, then I don't know like how we get there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I mean, that is should be the point of our work, right? To create the conditions to see joy and truth and beauty and yeah, if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? So
What are you doing? Or there are places where that is the case. LP is not one of those places. So
um I see Magley's back with us. Should we move to Q&A?
If you have a last question that you want to ask, or if that was the last question, I can pivot.
Let's open it up to the group.
Well, first, I want to thank you both again so much. I feel like I've been saying thank you a lot, but I really mean it so much. I'm so inspired by the work that you're doing, Ayesha. I selfishly will ask the first question. I wanted to know what some of the challenges are in operationalizing the kind of work that you're doing, because I really liked earlier you said that you don't see the work as being risk taking. It's just what you're doing and how you're operating. So I want to know what some of the challenges are that you face in operating the way that you do.
lots of challenges. And like what do I pull up? What do I pull up? Um, one of the things that is always a challenge is describing what it is that we're up to and what we're doing. I think it's not something that folks see regularly. So it is advocating for what we are operationalizing. I can never say that word. So that's one part. The challenge is just advocating for support and resources to continue building and doing what we're doing. We are, I think, in some ways, kind of building new models, new practices, and what does that mean to advocate for and to kind of bring in folks who champion uh, our ability to do that. So that's one challenge, I would say. And then also, that balance between undoing models that haven't worked for us. We are all trained in a particular way. We've all come through our own experiences, which inform how we show up in spaces. And so when we're trying to think about liberatory spaces, when we're trying to think about new practices and models, those old things still kind of show up and stick with you. So how do you like acknowledge that they do exist and acknowledge what blockages they are creating for or putting in place that are kind of hindering an ability to move beyond that and figuring out how to undo those old models and practices is something that we're constantly thinking about. I mean, I'm definitely, came up in a very traditional workspaces. And so I'm constantly being challenged in incredibly beautiful ways by the team to think more expansively about how we show up and how we do our work. So that I would say is a challenge, not in a negative or bad way, but just more in a generative way. So those are two things in particular that I think that stand out for me.
Thank you so much for that answer. I have a question from Charlotte. She says, with the current political climate taking an aggressive attack on DEI, nonprofits, and arts culture, has this had an impact on the LP? If you think there will be, how are you guys preparing for this? With the current political, sorry. Yeah. What are you planning on doing with the current political climate?
You tell me, I don't know. What are we doing? What are any of us doing here? Oh my goodness. I laugh because it's just so wild. It is wild. It is wild. Um, I will say for us, the thing that I keep coming back to, uh, I don't think that we've ever like thought about our work in a framework of like DEI and the way that it's constructed. We've been doing DEI work since the beginning of the organization. That's always been who we are and what we do. It is who we are and what we do. So we've never functioned in that kind of, I think in some ways, no, we've never functioned with that particular kind of framing. What I'm thinking about and grappling with is that our work has always been culturally responsive. We center communities of color. We work primarily in communities of color. We can't change what we do. I know there's a lot of conversations about, shifting the language that you use to talk about your work. That then makes the work is not authentic any longer if we strip that, because that is actually the work that we do. So I don't have an answer. It's something that we are thinking about every day. I sleep and I go to sleep and I think about it when I wake up in the morning and in my dreams. But I think something that was offered to me was, and something that we're actively doing, is figuring out ways that we can build our work so that we can continue to do our work, but understand very clearly what the risks might be so that we are able and prepared to be able to respond to whatever those risks are. So I will say that's where we're at now, trying to dig more deeply into the work that we do while still understanding the realities of the environment that we're in. And yeah, I don't know, it changes day by day. So I don't have a more kind of concrete thing to share, a more succinct offering there, but we're moving through it, but moving through it with the understanding that the organization will always be who the organization is. And that's kind of all we can do. So yeah.
Charlotte also said, I love your sentiments on love in the workplace and knowing love and care is needed to help produce the work that LP does because the focal point is community. And then we have another question from GE. GE asked, as the needs of the members of mentally disabled community are, as others, mounting greatly, could you speak to how the Laundromat project addresses these needs?
Mm-hmm. Of mentally disabled communities in particular, is that the question or ask? Yeah.
Yes.
So for us organizationally, kind of going back, I think about the organization being a space where all folks can be their full selves. So thinking about how we can think about resources and support that is expansive enough for anybody to be able to come in and feel like they can engage and be a part of our programming. Some of the things that, thinking about operationalizing what we do, some of the things that we've been doing internally, we actually have, and this is not speaking specifically to mentally disabled, but just thinking about different communities and things of that nature. We actually have an ad hoc therapist on staff. It's somebody who staff members can actually tap into for support, whether it be something that they're dealing with or focused on, or challenged by or working through organizationally or in their work, in their life itself. It doesn't have to be work related, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It can be anything. There are a set number of hours that staff members can actually email the therapist directly, and schedule time to meet with them. We think about how we might be able to expand that out even further, thinking about how inaccessible access to resources like that are, within community, how we might be able to leverage our resources to be able to support folks in that way. We think about our practices and thinking about like formal practices and policies that we put in place organizationally that support varying different communities. How we engage, how we respond, how we welcome in, how we normalize, I guess, which is the biggest thing for me, the normalization of it, uh, and what we can do organizationally to affirm the normalization, of that. So it's something that we are working through and continuing to evolve, and thinking about pulling in trainings and again practices, and constantly thinking about how we build that even further. But that's some of like the actual things that we've been putting in place so far. Mhm.
Well, thank you so much. That was the last question. I'll give you a chance to introduce the reading that you wanted to close off with
Oh,
before
I
we
forgot
close
about
out.
my reading. Oh, yes. So for the reading, and I appreciate this, for the reading to close out, I've been thinking about and reflecting a lot about future building and how we understand and think about the future. And particularly being in moments like these where things feel so heavy, and there doesn't seem to be much light. How can we think generations ahead of what we want to see and what we want to build, and how do we place ourselves in that space, to be able to do that? Appreciate folks like Salome and Ari and all the folks who like helped me kind of get into like my futuristic self. And so with that in mind, I wanted to pull up a passage from Toni Morrison's essay called The Future of Time. And what she offers is perhaps it is a reality of a future as durable and far reaching as the past, a future that will be shaped by those who have been pressed to the margins, by those who have been dismissed as irrelevant surplus, by those who have been cloaked with the demon's cape. Perhaps it is the contemplation of that future that has occasioned the tremble of a latter-day prophet afraid that the current disequilibria is a stirring and not an erasure. That not only is history not dead, but that it is about to take its first unfettered breath. Not soon, perhaps not in 30 years or 50, because such a breath, such a massive intake will take time, but it will be there. If that is so, then we should heed the meditations of literature. William Goss is correct. There are acres of Eden inside ourselves. Time does not have a future, longer than its past and infinitely more hospitable to the human race. So just a meditation like that.
Thank you. That was the perfect way to end this conversation. Thank you again, Ayesha and Salome. I am so greatly inspired by the work that both of you do. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSC program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Jelaine Jones and Andrew Woolbright on the occasion of A Walk with Deanne at 15 Orient. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ayesha and
Holding the
Salome. That
space
was
and your
amazing.
work. Have a
Thank you
good
so much,
evening.
Salome. Thank you, Ayesha.
That was amazing. Thank you so, so much. That reading at the end was so beautiful. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.